Nobody wants to get old and die, and I'll be the first to admit that the process of aging is no fun at all. I've been living alone on this island without so much as a watch, clock, calendar, or any kind of timekeeping instrument, so I've forgotten exactly how many years I've been here, or how old I am now. However, I do know that I have aged considerably since I originally dragged myself up this very beach and took my very first gaze upon this island. The shores welcomed me then as a young man, endowed with a lush head of hair, and although I've managed to survive all these years with nothing but my bare hands, wit and determination, the one thing I did have was a young fit body, full of muscle and vigour, without which I would have surely perished. However, had I arrived at my present age, I am certain that my chances of survival would have been significantly diminished. My arms and legs are tired, my muscles are weaker, my back hurts, and my brain isn't as sharp as it once was, as my memory of my life before I became a castaway gets blurrier by the day. Now you may be wondering, what the hell does all this have to do with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? Allow me to explain. Indiana Jones is a character synonymous with a man in his prime, who embarks on high-octane adventures that would simply be inconceivable for an elderly person. And this is clearly portrayed in the Dial of Destiny's opening sequence, which presents a youthful Indiana engaging in an enthralling escapade aboard a train in Nazi-occupied Poland during the tumultuous year of 1939. Showcasing Indiana's remarkable skills in combating Nazi forces, reminiscent of his earlier adventures. This opening flashback sequence impressed me greatly, as it successfully captured the essence of a young Indiana Jones at the peak of his abilities. Although the implementation of the deepfake technology used to rejuvenate Harrison Ford's appearance was not flawless, I still found it immensely enjoyable, brimming with suspense, and executed with great finesse, effectively evoking the essence of a young Indiana Jones in his prime. Perhaps in comparison to earlier films, such as the train sequence in The Last Crusade, which relied less on CGI and more on genuine stunts, the opening was slightly unrealistic. However, one must acknowledge that filmmaking techniques have evolved greatly since the 80s and 90s, and with Harrison's age, the emphasis on CGI, which prioritizes safety over practical stunts, meant it was unlikely this sequence could have been realized any other way. And I appreciated the filmmaker's earnest attempt to recreate the ambiance of an early Indiana Jones film. Following this captivating opening, we transition abruptly to 1969, where we encounter the true visage of Indiana Jones, portrayed by the visibly aged Harrison Ford. Now an elderly and frail man, I enjoyed this transition, seeing the transformation of our hero from a vibrant man of action into a stereotypical, embittered old man, knocking loudly on the door of his youthful neighbors, begging them to lower the volume of their music. I anticipated a narrative exploring the theme of an aging ex-adventurer who has since become a relic of the past, much like the ancient artifacts he used to pursue, confronting mortality and the relentless march of time. This presented an opportunity to surpass the realism of the James Bond films by telling a story about an aged protagonist incapable of his previous feats. Unfortunately, however, the film deviated from my expectations around 45 minutes in, when an 80-year-old Harrison Ford suddenly embarks on an entirely unrealistic action sequence involving a horse ride along the railway track of an underground subway. The theme of being too old for such activities is abruptly abandoned, as we witness an elderly Indy engaging in the same actions he performed in the opening flashback sequence, but now in an implausible manner. This sudden departure from what I anticipated the theme of this film was going to be left me disheartened, as it undermined the thematic groundwork that had been so carefully laid out during the first part of the film. I had been hoping for a narrative that depicted Indiana Jones as a realistically aged old man, reflecting on his past self, imagining him as an Obi-Wan Kenobi-like character, perhaps mentoring a young adventurer in his ways from the sidelines. But instead, we witness an 80-year-old man embark on another daring adventure, engaging in fights and chases just as he did in his younger years, in a completely unrealistic fashion. Now, it may surprise you to learn that I did not feel this way when watching the previous installment, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, as there is a significant difference between a man in his early 60s embarking upon such escapades compared to one in his 80s. If we are to assume that Indy's age aligns with Harrison Ford's, Indy was 64 in Crystal Skull, but is 80 in Dial of Destiny. And whilst it was slightly unrealistic for a 64-year-old to embark on the adventures seen in Crystal Skull, it was still somewhat plausible. While it is true that there are remarkable examples of older individuals achieving incredible feats, such as the 80-year-old who reached the peak of Mount Everest, it is important to differentiate between such extraordinary accomplishments and the intense physical demands of car chases, physical fights, and shootouts, as these activities require a different level of physicality compared to the steady climb of a mountain. Crystal Skull gave us one last adventure that audiences could still accept. But in Dial of Destiny, Indy's age becomes a hindrance as he engages in actions that defy realism, such as leaping from fast-moving cars and out of buildings while dodging bullets. I believe it should have been essential for the filmmakers to create an age-appropriate story with Harrison Ford's older age in mind, which could have been turned into a positive aspect. As I said, a film about an 80-year-old Indy could have explored themes of aging, mortality, and the protagonist coming to terms with his once remarkable abilities declining with time. In Crystal Skull, Indy's son Mutt served as a young Indy in training, with Indy taking on the role of the older, wiser mentor. This dynamic was far more realistic, and I was expecting the young woman in Dial of Destiny, portrayed by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, to assume a similar role as Mutt, a lively partner for Indy to train and engage in adventures with. Unfortunately, however, her character assumes a rather different role. From the very moment Helena was introduced, I could sense trouble. We catch our first glimpse of her, seated amidst students during Indiana Jones's final seminar at the university where he presently teaches, participating in a presentation about the siege of Syracuse. To my mind, Helena stuck out like a sore thumb, with her contemporary English accent and, dare I say, amateur acting style, which created a jarring contrast with the time period and setting, contributing to a feeling that the actress didn't quite fit the role, especially that of a lead female co-star in a period-based action-adventure film such as Indiana Jones. Nevertheless, it would be unfair to attribute all the blame to the actress, as Helena's character is deeply unlikable. She's smug, condescending, and driven solely by her desire to find the artifact she seeks for personal gain. She constantly berates Indy over his age, and is continually dismissive towards him. She spends the majority of her scenes demeaning and belittling him with offensive and sarcastic remarks, making her perhaps the most unpleasant character in the franchise. Her unlikable traits and ill-suited presence in the film's setting are accentuated by her excessive know-it-all attitude. She reminded me of a modern young and annoying schoolteacher, someone who perceives himself as intelligent and trendy, but in reality comes across as exceedingly uncool, self-centered, and narcissistic. She does not possess a genuine love for history, but instead sees the artifact she seeks as a means to further her own career and financial status. Even her initial claim of being an Oxford University graduate with a specialization in the Antikythera mechanism turns out to be a lie, as her actual motivations and plan revolve around selling the ancient artifact on the black market for personal profit, rather than any genuine academic or historical interest. This characterization raises a number of questions about her background. Is she truly a university graduate, or was she fabricating all of her credentials? It's never made clear. This brings me to another disappointing aspect I found with the film: the inciting incident that sets the story in motion. Unlike other Indiana Jones films, where Indy is tasked with preventing dangerous artifacts from falling into the wrong hands, the inciting incident in this film revolves around Helena's desire to sell the Antikythera mechanism at a private auction in order to pay off her debts. And this decision inadvertently alerts the villain to the artifact's whereabouts. The choice to center the story around Helena's financial motivations, rather than a more significant and historically driven quest, feels underwhelming compared to previous Indiana Jones adventures. And it's not only Helena who proves to be a problematic presence, as there are yet more unconvincing characters, such as Teddy, a second-rate approximation of Short Round from Temple of Doom, who also lacks any compelling traits and leaves no lasting impression at all. He appears to have very little substance and serves as a mere plot device, initially shown to us pretending to fly a plane with makeshift gears, only for that skill to conveniently come into play later in the story. It begs the question of why his character needed to be included at all. And then we have the villain, betrayed by Mads Mikkelsen, who also falls somewhat flat, despite the actor's potential to excel in similar roles. The character, named Volla, who most closely resembles Colonel Dietrich from Raiders of the Lost Ark, as a high-ranking Nazi officer pursuing an artifact that could alter history. While Mikkelsen's performance is notable, the film fails to provide sufficient depth to his character or explain his motivations until very late in the story. Furthermore, as an antagonist, he remained astonishingly one-dimensional, devoid of any complexity or depth, and offering nothing intriguing to engage with. He merely served as a psychopathic obstacle for Indy to overcome, devoid of any further substance or significance. It saddens me to say that the entire main cast feels off in this final Indiana Jones film. Harrison Ford appears too aged and weary for the over-the-top action. Phoebe Waller-Bridge lacks likability and fails to embody authenticity within the setting. Teddy comes across as a vapid Mary Sue, while the villain lacks depth, and his henchmen are generic and unremarkable. Furthermore, the brief and purposeless cameos from other Indiana Jones films, including Sala, played by John Rhys-Davies, and Marion, played by Karen Allen, contribute nothing substantial to the plot. And speaking of over-the-top action sequences, there are simply far too many of them, including a long chase involving tuk-tuks, which I found tiring. While I was initially willing to overlook the CGI elements in the opening flashback sequence, given the real-world limitations, the later incorporation of CG elements felt entirely gratuitous and unrealistic. Examples such as CG vehicles, CG eels, CG insects detracted from the overall immersion in the film, undermining both its tension and realism. Furthermore, the generic plot structure is another cause for concern, revolving around a monotonous pattern of obtaining an artifact, thwarting the villain's pursuit of said artifact, losing the artifact, and so on. This repetitive structure undermined the potential for substantial character development or narrative progression. In previous Indiana Jones films, the sequences and storylines were more tightly woven, leading up to a climactic final act. However, in this film, the plot feels fragmented and fails to provide a sense of cohesion or exploration. Additionally, the film's aesthetics and production values also come under scrutiny. The clothing, set design, and lighting fail to convincingly capture the atmosphere and authenticity of the late 1960s. The use of modern-looking fabrics, LED lighting, and digital camera footage, rather than traditional film, contributes to a lack of cinematic quality and authenticity. Furthermore, the sense of adventure seems notably absent even in the film's locations. Instead of exuding the vibrant and magical ambiance of a captivating holiday destination in the late 1960s, the settings appear more akin to modern-day tourist traps one might find in a generic travel guide. A useful comparison can be made by watching early James Bond films set in the same era, where the locations are infused with an enchanting and adventurous atmosphere. While some effort has been made to incorporate elements such as a few 1960s cars, hairstyles, and fashion items, the film ultimately falls short of creating a genuinely convincing effect. And then we have the film's duration of 2 hours and 24 minutes, which feels excessively long when compared to the previous Indiana Jones films, which all typically hover around the 2-hour mark. And even the preceding film, Crystal Skull, adhered to this convention. You know, many fans like to criticize Crystal Skull, but it's a bloody masterpiece compared to Dial of Destiny. In that film, the plot unfolds gradually, allowing us to delve deeper into the mysteries surrounding the Crystal Skull, ancient aliens, and the intriguing history of the pyramids in the lost city of gold within the Amazon jungle. It felt like a genuine exploration of history and archaeology, with a sense of learning and discovery. However, in Dial of Destiny, the locations lack the depth and authenticity that evoke a genuine historical atmosphere. The tombs encountered feel cheap, generic, and devoid of complexity, failing to provide an enriching historical narrative. Dial of Destiny's approach to history feels basic and lacks the depth and educational value that made Crystal Skull far more engaging in comparison in terms of historical exploration, albeit within a fictionalized context. And although Crystal Skull introduces what some consider an unsuitable concept for an Indiana Jones film, that of aliens, it still remains true to its roots as an Indiana Jones film. It maintains a strong focus on archaeology and exploration, with the inclusion of the aliens serving as another facet of an ancient mystery woven into the story. This approach is similar to how the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Holy Grail in The Last Crusade are integral parts of their respective narratives. And in Crystal Skull, the aliens are not so outlandish or detached from the established Indiana Jones universe, delving into extreme scenarios like Indy venturing into space, talking to aliens, or boarding a spaceship, which would have seemed far-fetched and disconnected from the franchise. Spoilers! On the other hand, the Dial of Destiny revolves around the concept of time travel, which is a far more explicit departure from the traditional Indiana Jones themes. Furthermore, in Crystal Skull, the introduction of the Russians as adversaries in the 1950s provide a fitting replacement for the Nazis. However, revisiting the concept of Nazis in the late 1960s in Dial of Destiny feels somewhat absurd. The notion that they would still cling to their ideologies and strive to win World War II merely because they believe they can achieve time travel comes across as both illogical and out of place within the historical context. It feels anachronistic, silly, and detracts from the overall credibility of the narrative. Additionally, the Antikythera mechanism's ability to predict time fishes raises numerous questions. Firstly, it is unclear how the American government, who is funding a CIA operation to recover the artifact, becomes convinced that the mechanism can facilitate time travel, given that this factor relies solely on the word of the Nazi doctor. Secondly, the concept of time fishes and their accessibility through flying planes through them also seems contrived and lacks proper exploration. Moreover, the villain's scheme to travel back in time and assassinate Hitler, anticipating the emergence of a superior leader, comes across as absurd and nonsensical. The premise of his plan seems to revolve around his intention to navigate a plane through a time fissure, with the belief that it will transport him to the year 1939. Consequently, this implies that the mechanism itself is not a time machine, but rather a device that merely indicates the locations of these time fissures. This raises the intriguing notion that these time fissures, therefore, must be constantly emerging if the device merely predicts their whereabouts. Therefore, the Antikythera mechanism functions more akin to the map featured in Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits, providing information about when and where portals through time will manifest, rather than generating the portals themselves. This naturally raises inquiries about the origin of these time fishes, their frequency of occurrence, and why they have never been encountered before. In the real world, the genuine Antikythera mechanism is revered for its complexity relative to its historical context, and only predicts astronomical patterns, such as the positions of the sun, stars, and planets when properly calibrated. In our modern age, we have had the technology to perform similar astronomical calculations for many years. Hence, it becomes perplexing how the device in the film predicts time fishes. Furthermore, if such a rudimentary device can forecast time fishes, why has humanity not developed similar technology in the preceding years to predict them? How did Archimedes discover these time fishes in the first place, and then construct a device to anticipate their locations? Moreover, why has no one else throughout all of history encountered these time fishes or found a way to track them using contemporary advancements? These questions raise significant doubts and highlight the need for further clarification within the film's narrative. Yet despite these questions and obvious holes in the film's plot, I was originally captivated by the concept of time travel in an Indiana Jones film, and eagerly anticipated experiencing a significant time-traveling adventure. However, yet again, my enthusiasm waned when the time travel sequence turned out to last a mere 15 minutes at the very end of the film, leaving me longing for a more substantial exploration of what could have been a fascinating concept. This all-too-brief concluding sequence to the film is incredibly disappointing, lacking any sense of awe or wonder. The characters simply crash-land a plane in the year 200 BC, coincidentally encounter a Roman soldier and the inventor of the Antikythera mechanism, Archimedes himself, and after an abrupt punch to the face, we find ourselves back in the 1960s again. We are never given a chance to meet or spend any significant time with the characters from that time period, robbing us of an immersive experience. If you're going to make an Indiana Jones time travel film, then for God's sakes, make an Indiana Jones time travel film! For starters, the film should have incorporated the time travel element far earlier in the story. This would have allowed us to fully immerse ourselves in and explore the fascinating concept of time travel and explore an ancient culture in its prime, mirroring the flashback sequence at the beginning of the film. Instead of the lengthy and uninspired action sequences that dominated the overly long second act of the film, these could have been trimmed or removed entirely, enabling the characters to discover Archimedes' tomb and embark on their time travel journey much sooner. This would have provided ample opportunity for an extended sequence set in an earlier historical period, introducing us to a variety of engaging period characters. I firmly believe this film had the potential to be a well-executed and captivating time travel experience, where we could have witnessed our beloved archaeologist navigate the challenges of finding himself in the ancient past. At the very least, the time travel sequence we were presented with could have been far more intriguing had the Nazis not succumbed to panic the moment they arrived in the time period, but instead managed to safely land the plane. Perhaps both the Nazis and Indiana and Helena could have been taken hostage by the Romans. This could have led to an unexpected alliance between India and the Nazis, as they worked together to escape the clutches of the Romans and find a way back to their respective time periods. Alternatively, perhaps only India and Helena could have successfully escaped, while the Nazis met their demise at the hands of the Romans in a death sequence befitting for villains at the end of an Indiana Jones film. Furthermore, Helena's decision to knock Indy unconscious due to her concerns regarding the potential alteration of the timeline after he expresses a wish to remain in the period raise an important question, as surely their presence and the crash of the plane have already impacted the timeline, and therefore it becomes perplexing why no noticeable alterations to the timeline are apparent when they return to 1969. Finally, I believe the Dial of Destiny would have been significantly enhanced by incorporating the death of Indiana Jones at the conclusion, particularly if the film had remained consistent regarding the thematic exploration of aging and mortality. The filmmakers could have taken inspiration from the James Bond franchise, which at least had the courage to conclude Daniel Craig's final Bond film with his demise in No Time to Die. And I believe a similar approach could have added a poignant and conclusive element to Indy's character arc. Knowing that this installment would mark the end of his journey, Indiana Jones's death would have provided a sense of finality and emotional impact, allowing audiences to reflect on his legacy and the significance of his adventures. Alternatively, the Dial of Destiny could have provided Indiana Jones with the retirement and closure he longs for. As a character who feels out of place and burdened by the passage of time in the 1960s, the film could have granted his wish to meet his demise in the ancient past during the time travel escapades, giving the character a happy ending, allowing Indy to find solace and fulfillment in meeting his end in the era he loves and cherishes, which would have provided a sense of resolution and a poignant conclusion to his story. It would have honored his character's desires and delivered a bittersweet ending that resonates with the theme of coming to terms with mortality and embracing one's destiny. In conclusion, it is my opinion that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is the most disappointing installment in the franchise, squandering a valuable opportunity to delve into themes of aging, mortality, and the passage of time, which could have added depth and significance to the overarching Indiana Jones narrative. It could have been a poignant and fitting conclusion for our beloved action-adventure hero to finally confront his own mortality and attain closure, whether in the distant past or through his demise. However, instead, the film presents an incoherent plot, unlikable characters, excessive action sequences, unconvincing settings, mundane locations, and an unnecessarily long runtime, and fails to capitalize on the potential for an immersive and captivating time travel story.